All right, Saagar, what's on your radar?
Well, as the United States Senate settles into Washington, we begin to get a better idea of what the Republican priorities going into the next bailout negotiations are going to look like. There were already signs that I brought you here, Senate leaders like Mitch McConnell and John Thune talking about the national debt, tinkering around the edges, as well as McConnell's pronouncement that we need a, quote, modest infrastructure plan in the middle of the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. Well, the plan is beginning to take shape, and honestly, it is even worse than I imagined. Corporate-friendly elements within the White House and in Congress want to push a capital gains tax cut, a measure which would allow companies to deduct any investments that they make at this time, along with the payroll tax cut. The list reflects the growing GOP idea that the next bailout package should focus not on the immediate crisis-facing workers and families, but instead on trying to stimulate economic growth to get out of the pandemic. As I glibly tweeted in response, if you had challenged me to come up with a parody plan that represents the agenda of economic libertarian conservatives who ran Washington before Trump's election, I probably could not have come up with something as bad as this. The hidden hand of economic libertarians is all over this one. They threw an underfunded small business program to the small business community. They gave concierge service, of course, to the largest corporations with little restrictions. And they stopped at just $1,200 in direct cash payments to American citizens. You see this taking form already. Senator Ted Cruz telling my friend Henry Rogers over at the Daily Caller, quote, "We simply cannot spend our way out of this crisis. I'm encouraged to see states begin reopening the economy region by region based on the science and public health guidance." So, what is their genius plan? Well, it seems it's to pass the same so-called growth-friendly plans that were in the 2017 tax bill, reopen the economy as soon as possible, and then hope and pray that, unlike last time around, the distributed effects of economic growth will just magically take hold. I can't believe I even have to say this, but this is incredibly stupid. Because first of all, we already know what finance and big business does when they're handed a nice tax windfall. All the money goes into stock buybacks and other non-productive sectors of our economy, no matter what investment incentives you're going to offer them. But worse is that we're screwed for a long time. Unless we have a vaccine like tomorrow, nobody's going back to work. We're going to have an economy basically running around 80-70% for the next 2 years, regardless of what the government advises citizens to do. So what exactly to do in response to this? Well, it seems pretty damn obvious. We need business to be intact, and we need workers to be able to make rent and other expenses so that literally our entire society doesn't fall apart. How do we do that? I have a crazy idea that I'm sure some of you are very sick of me even hearing say at this point, which is the government should just pick up the tab of laid off workers by paying businesses directly so that as soon as it's safe to do so, again, everything can be spun up very quickly. As Senator Josh Hawley said in a direct shot at these economic libertarians within his own party, quote, "The concerns that we have about deficit spending are going to look like a walk in the park. Bold action now to get people jobs back is not wasteful spending, it's critical." That is exactly right. The hundreds of billions that it will cost to make payroll costs is nothing compared to the literal trillions we will lose if we allow mass small business failure, worker failure, all while letting the financial sector get another tax cut, which allows them to spend even more of our treasure in China. Why is only a single U.S. senator in the Republican Party actually acting like Donald J. Trump is president, and they were not all living in 2012 under the tyranny of Paul Ryan? This is a question that I'll pose later in the show to my friend Orrin Cass. He is working to fix it, but it is one I'm going to be spending a lot of time working through with all of you so that this never happens to any of us again. Because look, at this point, I have no illusions. I'm pretty certain which way this thing is going to go. Because the Democrats hold the House, I doubt even somebody like Nancy Pelosi is going to let a capital gains tax cut go through. But some perverted version of this plan will be married with the umpteenth bailout for the hospital industry, and we're all going to walk away screwed. So remember that this was all a choice. Nobody with any real power in America right now is fighting for you. And the dystopian future that we're going to face with massive Fortune 500 companies that dictate every facet of our lives will be hellish. The only power that we have to take it down is to vote in future elections. I really wish I had a more uplifting message for all of you. But the real truth is that these are black times. And as I predicted at the beginning of this entire crisis, the largest populist uprising in history is certainly coming. Crystal, I mean, you look at that capital gains tax plan and the payroll tax cut.
It's
and
truly
all of that.
parody.
It's crazy. And like I said, I don't think that thing is going to go through full because the Democrats hold the House. But what are the Democrats fighting for ultimately in this? What is Nancy Pelosi and their so-called priorities? It's like more COBRA subsidies. It's more, money to the insurance companies. It's more money going into the hospital industry. I mean, is anybody even talking about more direct cash payments to Americans or a monthly recurring payment in the middle of a crisis? No.
Yeah, and progressives held a round table about it, but I wouldn't hold your breath.
A live stream or something like that. And same thing. I mean, look, Mitt Romney's out there, $12 an hour. I'm not going to hold my breath. Maybe some of it gets into the plan. I'll be very happy, and I'll fight as hard as I can here on the show in order to get something like that done. But I just don't think it is. I don't see any of those priorities reflected in where we are right now. There's some right-left cooperation, but it's just so minuscule at this point. You have people like Todd Young and by the way, Michael Bennet has very much stepped up to the plate, and I want to give him more credit here. Michael Bennett's working with Senator Todd Young, Republican from Indiana, to push more funding to the Paycheck Protection Program, specifically for smaller businesses. I think that's fantastic. But that's just the tip of the iceberg,
right? And
in terms of what we need.
The reality is, you talked about something we've talked a lot about here, which is take the approach that many other countries have taken by backstop. Federal government picks up the payroll so that so many workers aren't laid off. In a lot of ways, we're sort of beyond that point at this time. We've already had more than 30 million Americans file for unemployment, so that's where we are. I think you'd have to do something like that, and something that wild-eyed socialist Mark Cuban is calling for, which is you are probably going to really need some sort of at least temporary federal jobs program, because there is work that needs to be done and will need to be done to get the pandemic under control that can be done within these local communities, but does not have a market value. That should be part of the conversation. It's not part of the conversation at all. There was a moment at the beginning of this crisis when all of us were watching going oh my God, the Republicans are actually going to get to the left of Democrats in terms of the economic response. Right. Some of the things Trump was saying, Hawley was out there, Mitt Romney, no.
Quashed.
Don't worry about that, guys. Not a problem. Capital gains tax cut, corporate liability shield, other various and sundry business tax cut, payroll tax cut, 30 million people are laid off. What are you talking about? And then maybe the most controversial part within the administration, this is so telling, is the infrastructure plan, which is the one part that would actually be good and useful. And they're well, I don't know about that one. That may be a bridge too far. And people need to prepare themselves, because you can already see from the people that Donald Trump is listening to Mitch McConnell, and where the Republicans and all the corporate consensus in this town are going. Before you know it, before you can blink your eyes, they're going to say, we spent so much, we got to have austerity. And
they already did. They're already doing it.
And you know where that comes from. We are looking at deep cuts. Will they come from the military budget? Of course not. Will they come by, raising taxes on the wealthy or big business? Of course not. They will come from, once again, cutting into the threadbare social safety, anything that helps working class citizens. That is what will be on the table. You can see it all coming.
I want people to understand just how insidious of a plot this is, because it's it's been reminding me a lot of the Iraq War, where you had this small group of ideologues after 9/11 who were all wanted to go and invade Iraq, and who, by the way, had no representation in the American public at large, but had massive influence in terms of the administration. That is the same thing that's happening right now. You have a bunch of people, and this is the other thing. Can these idiots not look at polling? Trump is underwater with seniors. Mark Kelly is tied in Arizona. The Senate race in North Carolina is tied. They can lose the Senate. Listen, you pass a payroll tax cut.
Up in Montana.
In Montana. Steve Bullock is up in Montana. We're talking about multiple seats, which the Republicans could get wiped out. And you think the Democrats aren't going to nuke the filibuster the moment they can? Of course they are. And then we're truly screwed from a right-wing perspective. And this is I guarantee you that if they go down this road of capital gains and of cutting payroll tax cuts and not providing more and letting 40% of small businesses just go bankrupt, it's over. Game over. That's Herbert Hoover level stuff in terms of the losses that they're going to incur. But again, they're so committed to their ideology, to these true con ideology. And I'm really talking about 15 people who actually run the table of policy discussion in D.C. Highly well funded, all have their apparatchiks and formers who work in the administration, and who are calling up and getting Ted Cruz and others to put stuff out there about, oh, we need to cut spending, not a dime more in spending can be spent. These people, this is what I've been hearing, their genius plan is to reopen and then try and have Trump and the federal government encourage people to go out and dine at restaurants because they acknowledge that people are not going to go to restaurants on their own. Look, that's just not going to work. If people can look at it, people can look at an infection chart the same way I can. If the restaurant across the street from my house reopened tomorrow, no, I'm not going.
Right.
Because until I find out that I'm going to be reasonably safe.
Right. We were looking at data of 2 different towns, one in a state that's totally locked down, one in a state that is reopened, and people are making the same choices.
Yes.
Because they're evaluating the information around them for themselves and deciding, not based on like what the government told them, who, you know, how much trust do they have for the government, but based on their own analysis of what is safe and what is worth the risk for their own families, they're making their own choices.
Look, you can see this in Sweden right now. Sweden is open for business right now. This is a very preliminary data point, and I saw this. But so the city of Nashville is on a stay-at-home order.
Right.
Stockholm is not. They have the same level of, according to their anonymized iPhone data, in terms of their movements, same level of movement.
Right.
Okay, what does that tell you? Even in a place where everything's open, people aren't going out. Right now, all those meat warehouses that we're talking about, the slaughterhouses, nobody's coming to work. Everybody's pumping out. People are either quitting or just straight up not coming to work because they're afraid of getting sick.
Right.
That is an essential service. Now, apply that to the entire consumer voluntary economy. There's only one way to backstop this, and it's government coming in. And look, I know it hurts to all these people to spend, $1 trillion, $3 trillion, or whatever that we spent in the last year, but we will pay for that 10 times more in future lack of growth. And and look, that's even speaking in the gross terms of growth. Because I don't believe that growth, I do think growth is an important thing, but it's not the be-all, end-all, and that's what we talk about here on the show. We're talking about people who poured their entire lives into business, gone. We're talking about people who invested so much of their personal worth and net worth and all that into a business where they're working for, in their community, and all that. That's over. And so, again, if the overwhelming social effects of, look, already drug use in this country is up by like 50%. Alcoholism is up by like 50%. Or not, alcohol usage is up by 50%. The long-lasting effects of this will be untold if we don't try and backstop it now. Because otherwise, just like the Great Recession, we're paying the price of the Great Recession today. And it happened 11 years ago or something like that.
And it was nothing compared to what we're facing now.
And it's nothing compared to this.
I just don't, who are they listening to in this town from the beginning? They're listening to Wall Street. They're listening to corporate CEOs. And they're all saying, we got to get back to work. We got to get back out there and get the economy juiced. It's a fantasy. It's a dangerous fantasy. First, we need to make sure people are okay. And you have to, if you want people to stay home, if you want to get through this pandemic, you have to backstop the crisis. You have to. And I just don't see anyone in this town that understands the urgency. There are people that have some good ideas. But do I see any urgency? Do I see any willingness to step up to the plate and wield power and do what it takes to actually get something delivered for the American people? No, I do not.
I don't see it. All right, I'm looking forward to your radar next, Crystal.